to see all that I can be. Moving on the block.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Move Beyond the Block TV. I am so excited. Today I have someone who I think just gives the homegirl face to philanthropy and makes it so accessible, just makes us all feel like we can be a part of this great movement, this great work, and really what is, I feel, is inevitable in how we just interact and interchange as humans, sharing the resources of wealth and community. And so, with that, I want to welcome none other than Jessyca Dudley. And Jessyca Dudley is someone who's done great, marvelous work, not just in Chicago, but she's been leading a lot of the work around the country in terms of reparations, reparative philanthropy, if you want to call it that. I don't know. I don't know how comfortable you are with that word, reparations. I know it scares a lot of folks. So I won't put that on her, but I will say reparative justice is the work that she's done. And just a little bit more about your background, Jessyca, if you could just give us like what are some of the highlights that you would like to share about yourself?
Yeah, and thank you so much for that warm introduction. So I actually started my career out in public health, and I think it's important to talk about that because it frames so much of how I came into philanthropy and think about this work. So started off my background doing work with young women and girls of color, really thinking about their reproductive health and how to get them access to the care that they wanted and deserved, and then made this huge left turn into philanthropy. I was a program officer at the Joyce Foundation, worked on gun violence prevention and justice reform, got to do some strategy work with Arabelle Advisors, and then started Bold Ventures. We are coming up on 5 years in February. And so very much, as you said, we position our work as reparative philanthropy. We see reparations, the scale of reparations has to happen with the scale of the harm. And so we really think that reparations is work for states and large institutions, but as individuals, as groups of people, we can absolutely engage in reparative work. And we think it's so important that people start to think about the harm that has been caused and continues to be caused and how we can address that through philanthropic strategies.
I love it. And everything you just said proves that you are really an architect of the solutions of philanthropy. Highlights that you didn't say that I'm going to go ahead and do since you're being so humble and modest. You've directed more than $50 million to BIPOC organizations and communities around the world. Is that correct?
That is.
And also you've led roles. You also talked about your role here in Chicago, but you were in leadership at the Chicago African Americans in Philanthropy.
Yes.
You're also one of the co-founding members of the Southside Giving Circle, and I'm going to go ahead and say that that was the first that I'd ever heard of a giving circle, a Black woman-led giving circle in the city of Chicago. And really, I hadn't heard about it before you all. And I'm proud to say that that was one of the very first significant streams of funding that my organization, Girls Like Me, received. So that was very, very, very emancipatory. So thank you for that.
Yes.
And we're going to spend a little bit more time. You also are at the University of Chicago, working in that. What is that? Is that the Crown? Are you at the public?
Yeah, so I teach in the Crown School. So I teach about the history of philanthropy and social movements and the social sector leadership program at the Crown School.
I love it because everything we have to have a historic lens for everything because we can't see our way forward. I'm really big on Sankofa. We can't see our way forward if we don't understand the root and how we got here. So really, really, again, grateful for having you. We're going to hit on the participatory, say that 50 times, participatory grant making in practice, moving from consultation to community control. This is a philanthropic guide that came out of your agency. In 5 years, you all have been able to not just get the pulse of and feedback from, but you've also been able to guide. Again, I just want to say that, like, to really construct the new way forward in philanthropy. And I think that I just want to highlight that and emphasize that a little bit more. And what I take great pride in on your behalf is you were a strong advisor to those of us who co-authored the anti-racist pledge fund for the Golden Institute and Chicago Peace Fellows. We relied heavily on your counsel and expertise. And so, yeah, y'all, we got a Shiro rocking with us today. I'm so honored. So, okay, we got that out of the way. Or I shouldn't say got it out of the way. We led into this with that, and I'm so grateful for it. And also, Jessica, I want to ask you as we dive into this conversation, what is your lived experience and the values that really drive your work and how your approach to philanthropy?
Yeah, I think personally, I was raised in a family where service was an assumption, right? We were going to be in service of others, in service of our communities. I did a lot of volunteer hours, far more than were required for high school graduation. And I thought everyone else did that as well, right? I think I was a little naive in thinking that was just sort of how everyone functioned. I definitely think, and I talk about this a lot in the sort of context of philanthropy, there is the culture of philanthropy that so many of us were raised in, where service is a value, where supporting others in our family networks, in our communities, the kind of giving that happens in religious communities, that is something so many of us grow up with, so many of us are familiar with, and I think informs the way that we think about philanthropy. And we have to be careful to understand that there is a difference between that and the business of philanthropy, which is where I work, right? Which is governed by a different set of rules, a different set of intentions. While it still has that giving principle at its core, it comes out of a different tradition. And so I think a lot of what I have been trying to do is reconnect that business of philanthropy to the culture of philanthropy. How do we get back to that understanding of the ability to have collective thinking in this work? How do we really resource people who are facing every day the social challenges that philanthropy wants to solve and actually have them design those solutions, right? I always talk about, we're 150 years into this business of philanthropy. We've solved very few social challenges. And I think some of that is because we haven't actually gone to the people that are facing those challenges and said, what works? How would you best want to be supported? How can we actually support you in designing, developing, implementing these solutions, rather than saying, because I'm an individual or an organization that's amassed great wealth, that I'm in the best position to make these decisions for you.
Mm-hmm. I love that, and that even comes out in the guide, right? You all have these spectrums, and I was really um, just taken in with the spectrum, because it's a very wide spectrum, right? Starting all the way from closed, which I'll let you be the judge, but I know in my experience, that's been the reigning rule, right? This closed off thing, and all the way to what you talk about, this liberatory, reparative, the kind where the philanthropy defers to community. So I'll let you tell us like what that spectrum entails, and really how does it look. The questions are so layered, so I want to make sure I'm giving you a chance to answer. But I want you to dive into the spectrum all the way from the closed to deferred community, and then I want you to talk about what has been in your experience thus far. What has been some of the challenges and barriers to get from one end of the spectrum to the other?
Yeah, great question. So we have been doing a lot of participatory grant making work over the past 5 years. We've had the pleasure of doing that with healthcare organizations, with foundations, with groups of individuals coming together, all of whom were saying we want to have a different type of relationship with the folks who are going to receive these funds, right? So sort of those end users of philanthropy. But when we said participatory grant making, not everyone was saying the same thing. And so we thought it was really helpful to help folks think about what is encapsulated in that idea and sort of where are you along the spectrum of that, so that you can communicate really clearly with folks you want to do this work with, what role you're actually asking or honestly allowing for them to have in this relationship with you. So we have some organizations we work with, and when we think about closed, that means they don't have any kind of feedback or interaction with the people who will be served by these funds. They're saying, as an organization or an institution, this is the strategy that we want to put forward. We're going to fund this. We're not seeking any kind of interaction or feedback for that. When you move all the way to the other end of that spectrum to really thinking about what does it mean to cede the full decision-making power, it means that not only are you saying, we trust you as a group of people or as an organization that's based in our community to make decisions about the flow of this money, it also means the priorities for this money, right? So in that case, that's a situation where we've gotten to work with some amazing organizations. They'll bring in a group of community advisors or folks who are proximate to this work and say, we have a pool of funds. What should we do with it? And genuinely, we mean that. What should we do with it? What are going to be the most effective strategies? We're not saying it needs to be limited to this set of strategies. We're really asking you to inform the strategies. What should the process be for if there's going to be an application process, what does that look like? What's the right match for the folks that we want to have apply for this? How should that funding be distributed? Along what timelines, at what amounts? So that's sort of the fullest way that you can cede power. And then there's some places in between. Sometimes we're working with folks where it's really more of an advisory capacity. So that foundation or that organization is going to hold the strategy, but they're looking for advisement. Sometimes there's a part of that process that they're willing to bring others in on. And we really created the guide so that we could help folks identify, as an organization, as a funder, where are you at on that? Are you ready to give up all of your decision-making partner? Are you looking for partnership? Where are you on that spectrum so that you can think about how it's going to work in your own giving practice?
And so what have been some of the revelations? Because I'm sure that's a mirror, right? When you have very real parameters and definitions of what it looks like, and then someone can see, well, I guess we said this is what we were, but we're really here, right? What has been some of the revelations and really responses internally when an organization or foundation realizes that they're not exactly where they believe they are?
Yeah. So I think one of the big things is you have to have trusted relationships to do this work. So if you're at the beginning of your work building relationships with the community that you're working with, participatory grant making could be a hard practice to try and implement, right? There has to be trust there. There has to be a relationship. There has to be some shared desire to do this work. We have worked with funders who are really interested in participatory grant making, but they've gotten feedback from the community they serve that that's not the strategy they want. And that needs to be heard and respected as well. As much as shifting power, changing who's making decisions is critical for the future of philanthropy, participatory grant making is not the right strategy for every setting. And we just got to be honest about that, right? We are asking folks to assume something very similar to a program officer role. Do we have the capacity to compensate them for that? Right? We can't ask folks to come in and do this work, the work of philanthropy, and not compensate them in the same way that we would compensate ourselves for doing this work, right? We are asking them to bring their skills, their expertise, their knowledge, their relationship to this work, and that is compensated when you work for a foundation. So I think that's an important question to ask. Are you also ready, in addition to moving those grant-making funds, to compensate people for their time and their expertise? And then there's the mechanics of the work, right? We are bringing people into a system and a practice that has benefited from being opaque. How do we actually help share knowledge and educate people about how philanthropy works, how to design a strategy, how to work together in a space where you're making shared decisions? That all has to be baked into the process as well. And sometimes that part of the process is rushed, or it's just not there at all. And we see that the participatory grant making doesn't go as well because folks are bringing their experience in other sectors, other ways of knowing, other ways of doing work, and trying to bring it into the narrowness of philanthropy. And sometimes that can be a real challenge.
I love it. I'm thinking of ways in that I've seen it successfully done. And I'm going to say some, and then I'll ask you if you have any. I think Southside Giving Circle was a really good example of it, and I'll give a personal reason why. This again, one of the very first major, and when we say major, you know what that gift was. So for us,
Yeah.
not been getting, anything over $1,000 or $2,000 prior, right? Um, and I remember we were wrapping up our summer camp, um, and there was no staff. There was me, and then there were people who helped out, but there was no staff. And I think the Chicago Foundation for Women, it was the standard application, and it started asking about accounting and all these other things. And I was like, Ellie was at that time. Ellie was helping, and I was like, "Listen." She's like, "La'Keisha, you started the application, but I see you didn't finish." And I'm like, "Listen, it's just not. We don't. I don't have the capacity to do it." And I remember she called me back a couple of days later, and she said, "You know what? They revised the application. They took some of that, so it wasn't so laborious, and it wasn't. It fit the organization size, right? It wasn't for it. The original application wasn't a bad application. It just
Right.
wasn't for the capacity of the smaller organization. It didn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
And it was responsive. You all responded and adjusted. I think of Safe and Peaceful grant
Mhm.
here in Chicago. I think it started as a rapid response, a very small micro,
Mhm.
but it's a lot of participatory. It was what community thought was important work, and then the judges of the reviewers, or however you want to say it,
Yeah.
um, came from community. They were community members, and so I think those are two examples of attempts at it. I don't know. I wouldn't say that it meets all of the full spectrum of what you talked about, of what I guess what the and I guess it's not necessarily, I don't want to make it as if it's a like it's a goal or an objective, because you just said some people want that and some people don't, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I think that it's a good look at what can be.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
what would you give as some models?
So I think those are two great examples of how philanthropy can be responsive, right? To actually take the feedback that they're receiving from the folks that they want to fund and make adjustments so that it's possible for folks to apply and fund that work and have opportunities through that work. We've had an incredible opportunity to work with the Chicago Community Trust on their We Rise project. And in the final year of funding for that project, they decided to bring in folks who had direct experience in workforce development and who were business owners to make decisions about the next round of grants that would go out. And I think, again, right, you have an opportunity for folks who are actually doing the work to inform what funding could look like. What we heard from the foundation is that that process led to them identifying and having applications from organizations that that foundation had never had relationships with,
Wow.
right? So when you bring in a different set of decision makers, a different set of people to think about the parameters of the grant, who are engaged in outreach, you may reach other organizations who are doing incredible work, but were not on the radar of that foundation previously because you're tapping into a different set of networks and relationships. And so I think part of the participation is actually broadening the aperture of who should be invited, what is a good fit for this work, who are the organizations that maybe don't see themselves as a fit for this foundation, maybe have had a negative past experience with this foundation, but bringing in this new group of people to be a part of the process, the decision making, to help develop the language for an RFP can shift who sees themselves as a part of this work. And so I always think it's exciting when we end a participatory process and there's a set of organizations that are new relationships for a foundation.
Yeah, and I think that that is incredible. Speaking as a small organization, right? Myself,
Yeah.
um, there's a, I won't name who it is, but there's a corporation that came into Chicago. I'll name it. They're one of our funders. We
Yeah.
love them. It's Discover, and Venetia Johnson White is over at Discover, and I don't know. I won't say that this is the case for Venetia or Discover, but I will say that I've heard that there's a list, or there was a list years ago, that these are, when you come to Chicago, these are who you fund, right? These are the 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 Chicago All-Star team, right?
Yeah.
Of organizations and foundations. And I commend Discover because it went out of its way beyond the typical, I like to call them institutionalized
Yeah.
nonprofits, right? They went out of their way to really go deep into a community and find those smaller organizations, many who had never gotten any funding before, and was able to do that. And it was unrestricted, right? It's a beautiful marriage for community and corporations. So that's my question to you too: is when you think about philanthropy and you talked about the business of philanthropy, we
Yeah.
know that many corporations have an arm, a foundational arm, or a community engagement arm, or whatever they name it, for giving back and providing services and resources. Where do you see corporations in the whole gamut of participatory grant making?
Yeah, so we've had some opportunity to do this work with corporate partners. I do think, often corporate partners have a little bit of a different sort of approach to their philanthropy. One, because of how it's funded, right? It's usually funded by some profit of the business. And so it needs to be aligned with that sort of profit model. That sometimes can limit who they can work with, how they work, depending on the type of business. There might be some regulation there. But I do think, to your point, there's sort of I think, a fallback in philanthropy to fund those that we all sort of agree are effective, who are well known. And how do we break out of that model? Because if we only fund those organizations, then we're missing the opportunity for new ideas, new innovations, different ways of doing the work. And so I think for those corporate organizations, how can they keep learning, keep engaging, keep meeting new partners so that they're always at the forefront of funding what's innovative, what's effective, right? New doesn't mean that it's not effective. But how can they stay in that space of creating new relationships so that they are as aligned with what's happening on the ground and where the work is moving, and not stuck in a place where they're funding just sort of those known entities?
Yeah, I love that. And I also want to say this too and raise this up: is it's new to you, right?
Right.
But it may not be new to the community. It may be their
Exactly.
practice that they've already had. So
Exactly.
just two more questions, and then
Okay.
we can have back. One of the questions I wanted to ask, and I want to make sure that because this is a flowing conversation too, so I want to make sure that I did touch on this one. It was really important too. Um, yeah, this is the one I want to ask. So, how we have the demands, like, so philanthropy, the business of philanthropy, as you said, has its models, its objectives, right,
Yeah.
its priorities. The community and organizations have the work that they want to do and the ways they want to serve community. um, Both. How can nonprofits and organizations position themselves to be to be able to, one, hold philanthropy accountable, and even recognize what is possible with philanthropy, right? Because we, a lot of times, it's just the missionary posture, right? Like, we're just
Yeah.
waiting for somebody to come and save the day, and if they give us money, then they're almighty God, right? But how does community harness their power to do the asking, right,
Yeah.
and then to also hold philanthropy accountable, and at the same time be a trustworthy partner as well?
I mean, I think the work that you did with the Peace Fellows is really an incredible example of that, right? I think that work really started with a group of nonprofits coming together and saying, we would like to have a different relationship with philanthropy. And how can we go about doing that? What have we experienced collectively? What was challenging about that or harmful about that? What was positive about that? And how do we compel more funders to lean into what was positive about those relationships, and then build relationship around that, right? I do think that part of that conversation is about relationships. As much as we like to think of sort of philanthropy as a set of institutions, it is, but it is also a group of individuals who work there. And so how do we build relationship with the folks that are on the inside, right? It goes back to that, what is that inside outside game? How are we building relationships amongst our peers who are doing the work every day and with folks who are in philanthropy? I know personally, when I was a program officer at the Joyce Foundation, I really felt like my ability to make decisions and fund work was only as good as the relationships I held with folks who were doing the work. I needed those relationships to inform the decisions that I made, and I relied on them for that. And so how do you meet folks who are engaging in that way, willing to build the relationship, willing to be thought partners, and that thought partnership go both ways? So I think it's really finding those folks, building that sort of relationship with them, and then understanding from their perspective, what can accountability look like, right? We know that philanthropy has different accountability structures than, say, a corporation, right? Where it is a little bit more opaque. It can be harder to know sort of who is holding the power there, who is making the decisions. Will folks be upfront about that? Can you have a conversation about that? Can you develop long-term relationships? I don't want to sort of understate that that can be a heavy lift for nonprofits, right? To spend the time developing those relationships. And so I think it's about identifying, investing in those meaningful relationships and doing that collectively.
Yeah. And I also was also wanted you to touch also on, you can do great work. I wanted you to give, if you can, if you think it's necessary. I really want, because we often, I know I've been a person who's done this as well. We've also been like, I'm doing this work. I have, I have a track record. I have do great things, and then we find ourselves given opportunities and we can't meet the moment. And so I was kind of wondering, like, how can organizations better meet this moment to make sure that they're prepared?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough question, right? Because you need to have the capacity to do the work and to talk about the work and to build relationships around the work. And that's a lot of directions to be moving at one time. And I think, like, you just need to be honest about that, right? And so there probably are going to be moments that get missed just because of the limitations of capacity. I do think that's where sort of the collective work becomes important on both the foundation and the nonprofit side. We also think there's huge power when foundations and groups of individuals come together and share in that learning and that work together, the same way that happens on the nonprofit side. I do think it's also, it's a learning curve, right? It's about sort of understanding and learning from what happens in each of those relationships and building for the future. I think right now is a particularly hard time to ask people to hold all of that, right? And so I do think it's calling on your relationships, right? Like, we've had conversations about this. How can I support you? How can we think about this? But I do think, and especially in this moment, it's hard for any one person or any one organization to hold all this work and really successfully harness all of the opportunities that might come through.
Yeah, collaboration is definitely the key in this, and not just to say collaboration, but real. That's another conversation for another time. That needs to be participatory as well. But I definitely think, and I'm grateful that there are many others who are fully understanding that. This will be, so I have the last question. Is kind of fun. I already told you what that was. But right before we get to that question, I want to ask of you. You talked about service in high school and it being a way of life. And then you talked about the business of philanthropy and philanthropy, serving, and then the culture, and then the business. We know, like, right now, mutual aid is a real thing. It's necessary. It's absolutely vital right now. And when we think of mutual aid, we think of, food giveaways and clothing, resources, right? But a lot of times when we do these things, we're also we're having to feed people and provide an experience. Who from the community should we expect, or should there be an expectation that when we're providing these opportunities, mutual aid, give back opportunities, what parts should we expect that they can donate their time, expertise, services?
So thinking about folks in the community. So I do think, right, mutual aid really does come from that culture of philanthropy. It's really about communities coming together to make sure that they are safe, protected, cared for. And I think we hope that the mutualness in mutual aid is mutual, right? So when someone has something they're able to provide for others, and at some point that may change and someone else in that community has more and is able to give back, I think that we've got to think in that sort of long-term way of building with mutual aid. Mutual aid is not a one-time or a short-term sort of giving opportunity. It's about building the relationships and the collectivism for that sort of long-term support. And so I think the expectation is to join and be a part of the community and to stay engaged, to stay involved, to stay in relationship, so that as the sort of times change and circumstances changes, those who can provide in that network have the ability to do so, feel supported to do so. And at some point they may need those resources as well, and know that that community exists for them.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of instances in, like, when you have these experiences, because we've done mutual aid too, and collaboratively. And we had to, you have to tell the story. It's unfortunate that you have to record. You don't want to take anybody's dignity away, but you have to record the story and tell the story. So that's a videographer or photographer that you need that day. Sometimes, we create the block party kind of feel for it. So, you got to have some music, right? Somebody's going to feed people. There's a chef or a restaurant that may have food. So I'm just asking, like, does philanthropy expect that those entities should have the capacity always to give their services?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really going to depend on the foundation, right? I think there are foundations who understand that those kinds of opportunities for mutual aid are about community power building, and they're going to support that work, and they're going to see that as something that is fundable and that they also want to be a part of, that they want to see strong community connections. They know that when community connections are strong, other sort of challenges can be resolved. So I think it's finding partners who really value community cohesiveness, community connectivity. I think when we talk about safe and peaceful communities, right, that was the focus of the Chicago Fund. How do we create stronger community ties? And so much of that happens through mutual aid.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, I think this is the fun question. So if you had to name a hero or ancestor who guides you in your philanthropic endeavors and your journey, who would you name?
So I really think about my grandmother, Willie Mae Lyles, and her siblings who really modeled mutual aid for me, right? My grandmother is one of 8, and there were certainly times where one person in the family had something to provide and made the most of that and ensured that everyone else was stable. There was just a lot of collective care that I got to witness. And I think that that is really what frames the culture of philanthropy for me, and the kind of legacies that I am trying to bring forward into the work that I'm doing.
I love it. Let's lift up her name again. Your grandma is Willie Mae. What's her last
Willie
name?
Mae Lyles.
Willie Mae Lyles. We lift you up. We bring you into the space, and we thank you for all that you modeled for Jessyca, and that we get the benefit of your work and your love.
Yes.
Jessyca, it's been amazing having you. I love your brain and just hearing how you talk and think. And I also love that you're doing this work. Tell us and tell everyone who's listening how they can get a hold of the Reparative Grantmaking Guide. And then also, where do you want this to, like, how do you want this out in the world? What do you want people to do with it?
Yeah. So feel free to visit our website. It's at alltogetherbold.com. We have the guides available. We have multiple guides available. You can download them. There is no charge for that. We really do hope that people will use these guides. It's been such a pleasure, such a joy personally to see people print them out and use them. Always welcome folks to reach out to me if you can't find that information. Happy to connect with people and share it with them.
Again, one more time.
Yeah, so our website is alltogetherbold.com. Our firm is called Bold Ventures, and lots of resources on that website that we hope folks will actually download and use. So the greatest honor for us is to see these materials used for people to sort of question and ask how philanthropy works and hopefully push for some change.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Jessyca, are you on LinkedIn as well? Can people follow you?
I am. You can find me on LinkedIn. I try to post pretty regularly about this type of work and sort of share about what we're doing, what we're learning. Our goal is really to try and educate others as we're learning alongside the work. So we try to get as much out there as we can about what we're learning.
Thank you so much, Jessyca, for being with us today.
So good to be with you.
Absolutely. You've been watching another episode of Move Beyond the Block TV. It's been amazing. I definitely want you to make sure that you follow altogetherbold.com. You'll see it streaming along the bottom of the screen right there. There's so much richness in that guide. I think that it is something that we can, when we enter into these partnerships and relationships, that we are able to review things together so we can see, and that's how you build the trust, because everybody's coming from the same framework, so there's no misunderstandings, miscommunications. We all have this framework that we all can work from, and I'm really appreciative that Jessyca stopped by with us today. So y'all know we'll be back here just a week from now. I'll have another dynamic guest for you, and you're going to want to tune into that conversation as well. As always, move beyond the block, move beyond the habits that are blocking you from your shine in life, because there's so much more to obtain. There's so much more for you to give, and there's so much more that the world is waiting for you to give. All right, y'all. Peace.